You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Episode 69, The Paradox.
Welcome to The Paradox with your attending, Dr. Eric Larson. He is a practicing anesthesiologist and clinical assistant professor at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine. Listen in as he takes you behind the scenes of what practicing medicine in today's ever-changing world is like with another doctor. The Paradox is a fun and accidentally informative show for physicians, patients, or anyone who has ever found themselves in a waiting room.
Welcome to The Paradox. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Larson. Thanks for joining me as we explore the U.S. medical system in a fun and informative format through expert analysis. Today's expert is Dr. Corey Fish, a pediatrician from Portland, Oregon. He graduated from the University of Washington and completed his pediatrics residency in Texas. For a few years, he practiced general pediatrics in an area without specialists. He tried practicing general pediatrics in a city swimming in specialists, but neither one quite felt right. Either way, he felt like he hadn't found his niche. That's when he opened his own pediatric urgent care, and the story goes on from there. Why we need pediatric urgent care centers versus regular urgent care, and what it means for quality health care and controlling costs. Urgent cares cost about 10% or less of what an ER visit does. So imagine how much better things would be if non-emergency care could be done in a quality, low-cost center. I'm certain you'll find this interview interesting, and if you're a doc or nurse practitioner or PA, perhaps this might be a career option for you. I'd like to take a brief moment to thank my patrons at Patreon. Thank you to Nicholas, Lucas, Brian, Eric, Deanna, Greg, Dan, and welcome back, Beline. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/theparadox. That's PRADOCS. Not only do you get to support the programming, but you also get access to bonus content and shows, of which I'm producing now one a week. Of course, if you have not already done so, please subscribe in your favorite podcast player to the show so you don't miss an exciting, thrilling episode. But without further ado, Dr. Corey Fish and a discussion on his pediatric urgent cares. Oh, and Mohawks. You'll have to listen to more to hear out his hairstyle choices. Enjoy. Well, hello, I'm here with my new friend, Dr. Corey Fish, who's a pediatric physician in Portland, Oregon, and he's got a really unusual story. Well, unique, I wouldn't say unusual. It's a unique story that he has started an entrepreneurial sort of venture where you've sort of decided to do something completely different than a traditional pediatrics practice. So why don't you tell me a little bit about kind of how your evolution to getting to where you are today?
I think you want to know why, like how I got into pediatrics.
Well, I think you started residency, obviously went to pediatrics, but did you go straight out into a regular private practice? Did you get an employed model, and how did you end up sort of where you are right now?
I did my residency in Austin, Texas. Excellent training, Dell Children's Medical Center of Central Texas. Learned a ton there. But one thing that I was often frustrated with is I just felt like things were so fragmented. Like, the primary care doctors would admit kids to the hospital, and we'd get these kids who were direct admissions, and they would either be like not sick at all or like way sicker than billed, and there was just a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And so I said, I kind of want to live in a mountain town anyway. So I said, well, you know what? Like, why don't we just pack up, we'll go to like small town USA where there's no subspecialists and there's no children's hospitals, and I'll just do everything myself, and then I'll be happy and
exactly
able to kind of do everything that the way that I feel like it should be done. So we did that. We moved to Bozeman, Montana, worked there for 2 years at a little practice called Acorn Pediatrics, which is now Hatch Pediatrics. And learned a ton, had some really great mentors there. Sue Daniels, a great pediatrician, really kind of helped me through. And I call that my fourth and fifth years of residency, because not only were there no children's hospitals in the state, there were no subspecialists in the town I lived in. There was maybe a dozen across all disciplines, and none of them were closer than about 3.5 hours. So that means I was doing everything, level 2 NICU and, titrating insulin drips for kids in the ICU and, doing ER and inpatient and outpatient and everything, which was super exciting. But ultimately, Bozeman wasn't, a great fit for our family. And we decided to kind of move back after a couple of years to the Northwest. But I really am grateful for that experience, because I feel like it really shaped like who I am as a provider. So we moved back to Portland, Oregon, and got a job doing primary care here, which was very different in a lot of ways. Tons of children's hospitals, we have great children's hospitals in town, tons of really good subspecialists. But I was also, kind of struggling against this sort of feeling of being kind of unfulfilled because, if like I needed an ultrasound for a possible appendicitis on a Saturday, like no one will let you order that on an outpatient basis. You have to like send the kid to the ER, which seems sort of silly and wasteful to me, to send somebody for thousands of dollars to a place where they're going to do basically what I just did and order the tests that I already knew needed to be ordered. So, did that for a while and then ultimately just decided like, hey, I'm not, professionally getting what I need. I feel like my talents could be better put to use elsewhere and was kind of losing that skill set that I worked so hard to develop in Montana. So, did a lot of, staying up late with my wife, Annalisa, talking about, what should I do? Should I go back to school? Should I, work in a hospital? What do I do basically? And ultimately decided on, hey, why don't you start your own thing? And I was like, yeah, but there's a million pediatricians in town. And, I don't know if I have anything more to offer than anyone else. And, and then I was peripherally aware of this pediatric urgent care thing and knew urgent care was like a rapidly expanding market. But for lots of reasons, I think pediatric specific urgent care is super important. The whole kids are not small adults thing. And so decided that I was just going to open my own pediatric urgent care and kind of get everything set up and try to do, 80% plus of what you can get in an ER, but at, 1/10 of the cost and, 1/4 of the amount of time it takes.
Yeah. Well, it's the couple things. One is before I talk to any medical student, when I'm in the OR and I have like a little talk about, physiology and things like that for the medical students who are with me. And I always say, we're going to talk about pediatrics, the difference between pediatrics and adults. And of course, pediatrics are just, kids are just little adults, right? And, of course, that's the first line of every pediatrics textbook that, kids aren't little adults, right? And then, and it's very interesting too when people leave practice. And I think people who aren't physicians are not aware of when you leave your residency, you sort of establish the building blocks, but how you're going to practice and the sort of the fundamentals of what you know and how you implement them really is shaped those first couple of years right out of practice. I mean, that's this case for anesthesia. I know for surgeons it's the same, and I imagine primary care it's very similar too. It just your routine, how to get through your patient visits and the way you figure things out. And I mean, that is sort of like a learning period. And when we say we're practicing medicine, in some ways it's very true. And I think people don't like the thought that they're being practiced on, but it doesn't mean you're not skilled or know what you're doing. But I think you're always learning in medicine sort of how to do things better.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's the old quote, it's like the second you stop becoming a student is the second you should quit your job and retire. But yeah, no, it's definitely true for sure.
Right. And I think it's very interesting sort of your evolution and how you end up where you were or are now, I guess. When you say you were the primary care or the urgent care started becoming a big thing, what do you mean by that specifically? Because I guess I'm not, as someone who's not in the primary care region or, realm, and I'm just an anesthesiologist in the OR. I don't really see this sort of stuff. What do you mean by you saw things growing, trends in the industry?
Yeah. I mean, it's, urgent care, in general is projected to get close to, I think, $20 billion over the next few years as an industry.
Okay.
It's grown, hundreds of % over the last decade, in terms of number of urgent cares and patient visits to urgent care. And there's a few reasons why I think that has happened. But it's become fairly big business, and there's private equity firms that are kind of rolling up large numbers of urgent cares. Because I think that even though it's just a quote unquote like brick and mortar business, I think people are realizing that it's a highly it's a service that people want, and it's a highly utilized service, and it's growing very quickly.
Yeah. Well, and I think it seems like any sort of industry, if you can find some price point where you cut the cost by 90%, which is what you said, it sounded like it was for urgent care.
Yeah.
compared to an ER, which is sort of the standard emergency or urgent treatment that people would have to receive, you're going to become a disruptor, and you're going to find a niche in the market. I mean, you see that from Uber, you see it from multiple startups that find some way of sort of beating the current sort of way things are done at a price point that's much lower, and oftentimes delivering superior care. Can you describe with the urgent care, with your pediatric care, how that's different than a regular urgent care, and then what difference does that make versus your standard urgent care? Like, we've got them here in town, but we don't have a pediatric urgent care in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, perfect. Well, maybe we need to put one in Grand Rapids.
Well, it's funny because so we were talking before the show, and my wife, she was listening, and she listened to you on a CME product. You were giving a talk at some conference, I suppose, and she stopped. She often talks. I find this very funny that she talks to me about her CMEs, because half of them, when I turn them on and listen to them, they mention the word poop, which is something you don't hear anywhere else in medicine except when she listen to pediatric talks.
That's true. That's very true.
Or like people crying and stuff. It's just not something you hear anywhere else. And I'm talking about the cardioprotective effects of isoflurane through cardiothoracic anesthesia. It's like, this is totally different. But she stopped and she said, "This is something we absolutely need here in town. So why don't you explain why it's so different and why it's advantageous?"
Yeah, definitely. And so I think, it's pediatrics is really a specialty unto itself. Kids are highly nuanced little humans, and especially before they can talk, you're really relying on, your physical exam. I think pediatricians do some of the best, have some of the best physical exam skills in medicine, only because you can't ask your patient how they're feeling. You can ask the parent how they think the child is feeling, which is super useful information. But it's not the same as like asking the kid directly. And so, there's a lot of nuance there in terms of like, watching their face and how they react when you're palpating something. And then the other thing that's different kind of about kids, at least this is what's been told to me about adults. I'm not an adult physician, so perhaps you can correct me, but adults will, I think when they're doing poorly with their health, they'll kind of like, really, there's sort of like a slow decline, and yes, they get sick and sudden things happen, but it's like, you can kind of see an adult like not doing well with their health. You kind of see that one coming. Kids are fine until the second they're not fine. And there's a very, very sharp drop off there. And so I think if you're not really comfortable in doing that every day, I think people who are not pediatricians, especially in the acute care setting, just get a little bit like scared or nervous, which I can't blame them for. I would feel the exact same way. And so I think because of that fear and nervousness, it leads to one of two things: either way too much stuff or not enough stuff. And I think, or just the wrong stuff, I suppose, in general. So, I see that, I saw that, for years as a primary care pediatrician. People would come to me from urgent cares that are not pediatric urgent cares that shall remain nameless for the purposes of this podcast. And, they'd come and they'd say, I'd be like, "Hey, what's going on?" It's like, "Oh, well, they were coughing and the kid obviously has a virus." And I'm like, "Well, what did they do for you?" They're like, "Well, they got a chest x-ray and steroids and an antibiotic, none of which was necessary." And it's like, can we just stop already? So there's a lot of that I've seen, both then and now, where it's like, you just kind of like, it can be a little bit frustrating, to try to deal with. But the other thing I see a lot is, to kind of illustrate the too much of something, is it's like the 2-year-old with ear pain, and they go in and, somebody looks and is like, "Oh yeah, they have an ear infection. Here's some antibiotics." And the parent was already worried about an ear infection. And so they're like, to the parent's mind, they're like, "Oh, I was right. They have an ear infection. We'll give them these antibiotics and get better and they'll be fine." And maybe the right thing to do was not give the kid antibiotics, because maybe that ear was just a little bit pink or had a little bit of clear fluid, and maybe it would have gotten better on its own. So there's just a lot of that. And I think unless you are a kid expert, that's always going to be the case, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so I know when my wife was listening to it, there were a number of sort of statistics you were giving in the differences between a standard urgent care and sort of what they send to the ER and those sorts of things. Can you just go over that briefly?
Yeah, definitely. So national average for transfer to an ER from a pediatric urgent care is a little over 2%. Our practice is we hover anywhere between 1 and about 1.6%. And then adult urgent care send pediatric patients to the ER, probably somewhere close to 40% of the time, or maybe even a little bit more. Wow. And like most of those patients, or about half of those patients, are leaving the ER with either nothing or with like Tylenol or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because, you were talking about how kids are fine until they're not fine. And if you're a parent and you have a kid who has a fever, you give them some Tylenol, the fever breaks, and they're like running around the house and doing everything. And then you just watch them kind of dwindle down quickly, and then they're, when their fever comes back. And I would say the same thing is seen in the geriatric population, like the really old who are in the 80s or so. They're fine until they'll do like an exploratory laparotomy, and they'll have dead bowel. Where someone if they're younger, they'd be in agony and just, and tachycardic and all sorts of problems. But the old people are totally fine until they just suddenly, they're gone.
Yeah.
And so I think the same thing as far as for practitioners, if you're not comfortable with these ages and sort of the signs, your sort of default, your reflex is to just to admit or to just send them on to a specialist because you're like, I'm just not quite as comfortable with the situation, which I guess you'd see that's why you see that 20 times, the rate of sending someone to the ER for the pediatric population.
Yeah, definitely. That's true. Yeah, it's just tough, right? I mean, there's no way you could ask me to like jump into an operating suite and ask me to start like running the anesthesia machine. I would have no idea what to do. And I think it's, largely the same with kids. It's just, it really is a unique specialty. And I think, unless you're trained for that, that's all you do. I think it can be, really tough ask, especially with some of the trickier cases sometimes.
What do you think for staffing your urgent cares? I mean, do you think that someone who's like right out of residency in pediatrics goes straight into this, or is this something that you need a couple years experience before you feel comfortable in the urgent care?
Yeah, I think I think it's not, there's not enough of a pattern there to say one way or the other. Mm-hmm. I've certainly met, new, brand new providers who were awesome and could do great. I think it's more of a mindset thing, to be honest with you. I think just, the people who I've seen have the most success in this type of setting are able to, first of all, kind of get into their flow state when things are crazy, which is how I kind of operate. I sort of, when things are feeling crazy and busy and fast and there's sick kids and stuff, I kind of zen out on that, and I'm able to sort of move through that and keep a level head. And I think not everybody is suited for that sort of work. And then I think the other thing is the other kind of main predictor for success that I've seen is folks being able to just like say, okay, I haven't seen this exact thing before, but this is what I know from my medical knowledge. This is what I know from physiology. This is what I can infer to this new situation based on what I already know, and think critically and be able to make a decision. Because if you can do that, most of the time you're going to be right, but it's just having the confidence to trust that, but not being so confident that you're gonna, make a wrong decision. One thing I learned that's stuck with me a lot is your confidence to competence ratio, and you should always keep your confidence to competence ratio less than 1. That's not my idea. I stole it from one of my attendings at the UW School of Medicine. I don't remember who that is, so if you're listening, sorry, I stole your idea.
Well, it's very true. And you'll find residency directors, they'll always come in, they'll say, when they're looking for the selection process for medical students, who they want to get in their residency, they will always tell you that I want someone who's going to be dependable, who's going to show up and who knows what they know. And most important thing is that they know what they don't know. And that's the dangerous docs are always the ones who think they know everything and lack that humility and have the confidence that exceeds their competence.
Yes, correct.
So one question I had too about this is that, it looks like initially you had one clinic, I think it's called the Pacific Crest Children's Urgent Care, mm-hmm. and then you decided to rebrand and become Brave Care.
Yes.
Can you explain that decision and what that sort of means?
Yes, I can. It's a very exciting, actually. So, I opened this urgent care in October of 2017 and realized very quickly that the hard part of opening a practice is not getting the doors open. It's what you do the day after you open, and then everything from there on. And, nobody in medicine teaches you how to run a business or any of that
Nope.
stuff. And, so, it was me kind of struggling through all of these decisions I wasn't qualified to make in terms of marketing and, just everything, right? I mean, you could be the greatest thing ever, but if nobody knows about you, it totally doesn't matter.
Right.
And so I was sort of limping along, miserable, working, 70 plus hours a week. And then I was very lucky enough to meet my business partner and now our CEO, Darius Monsef, who is kind of a serial entrepreneur, has done a number of things in the startup space, and has 3 kids, one of whom split his chin open. This is not a HIPAA violation. He's told the story a number of times. I'm sure he would be fine with it.
I've read it on the website, in fact, yes.
Yes. Okay. So his son split his chin open, did a nice layered repair, saw his daughter like less than a week later with super significant croup, like barely kept her out of the hospital. And he was like, hey, I'm looking for my next thing. I've done some stuff in tech and, in the startup world, I just want to see if there's an opportunity here. And so we talked and met, and he kind of pitched me on this idea. He's like, hey, look, what if we build something together? And what if instead of you just struggling through this, I come in, I help, we bring in some investment dollars, and we really start working on, what, we hope to be sort of one day a national pediatric healthcare company founded on the principle of taking the best care of kids and families and taking the best care of our employees and staff. And, that's really kind of our guiding principle. We believe that we can build a successful business based on that, as opposed to what everyone else does, which is how can I cut costs and make people's lives miserable and all of that. So, so we met, we started working together, brought in some investments, raised a pre-seed and then a seed round, did the rebrand in the middle of all of that again, which is sort of like, you did a good job, but now we have experts who are really good at things like marketing and branding and building all of that stuff. So, if you can be okay with kind of letting go of some of these things, which I 100% am, by the way, then we can try to do this. And so we, that was part of that, is an effort to kind of rebrand and to help with the expansion plans. We've got a couple clinics scheduled to open in the Portland area here in the next 6 to 9 months or so, probably. And one thing, so that's kind of, where what we're working on at this point, and going to try to grow the brand and yeah.
Well, I mean, you look at a lot of the clinics, and I'm trying to, there are definitely national names when it comes to urgent care clinics, right? Like, is it Ready Care? Is that like one? Or I feel like I've seen common names, at least. Maybe they all use the same name. I don't know, but I assume they're sort of branded too.
Yeah, there are. There's a bunch of them out there. In the pediatric space, there's PM Pediatrics obviously is kind of the big the big player in that space. There's Nightlight Pediatric Urgent Care, handful of others that have between 5 and 10 offices and that. So yeah, and then on the adult side, yeah, there's tons of players nationally as far as that goes.
It seems like when you look at the urgent care clinics, I'm going to talk just about in my area, but I know when I talk to other physicians who, I guess, disparage urgent care clinics as providing not great care oftentimes.
Yep.
One of their major complaints is that there's not a physician to be found in these these clinics, that it's staffed by people who maybe are not have the best clinical acumen anyway, and they find the way sort of like they're a nurse practitioner or they're a PA, maybe they're not that good, I guess, is really what to say. And they just follow an algorithm and they order tons of tests to try and find an answer, or in a way to generate revenue for the facility too. Like you mentioned, the X-ray and the nebulized treatment, all this stuff that's for things that are, don't require really any treatment at all, except to say, pat them on the back and say, well, come back in a couple of days if it gets worse.
Yeah.
How do you staff your clinics versus like theirs? I mean, do you agree that that's sort of a problem in the urgent care arena as well?
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree that there is that stigma out there. But I would sort of say, like, I mean, there's good providers and bad providers everywhere.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
but yes,
absolutely.
it is absolutely a stigma. Again, I mean, our goal is to do really high quality evidence-based medical care. I would say that I definitely understand where that comes from. I think the point I would make to that is, there are PAs and NPs that are fantastic. In fact, we have two PAs that work with us currently that are phenomenal. And one of them has been practicing as long as I have, knows as much or more than I do about, diagnosis and treatments, especially for certain things. Like, I would say she probably puts on a better cast than I do. But I think it's really, I think where the mistakes with those other places happen is kind of hiring just to hire a warm body to be in a seat.
Yeah,
I think
right.
when you do that, you're going to set yourself up for failure, whether that's you're hiring front desk staff or nurses or MAs or PAs or NPs or docs or whatever. And I think our process looks very different, which is that, as the chief medical officer, the medical customer service and medical delivery and standardization of healthcare, I feel falls squarely on my shoulders. And I have a very high bar for how that gets done. And so, we don't tolerate, things like, ordering tests when they shouldn't be, or ordering medicines when they shouldn't be, and this and that and the other thing. So I think our process, just in terms of who we put in those positions, looks very different. But the other point I want to make, and we're running into this a little bit too, is it's been very easy to find a large pool of PA and NP candidates for these types of positions. It has been very hard to find any sort of pool for traditional, MDs and DOs. And
Right.
I think I have theories about why that is. And I think a lot of it really boils down to, in medical school, you go through medical school, you go through residency, and you're like, okay, well, I'm done being a resident. Now I'm going to go practice medicine for 25 years and work in a clinic and be an employee, or maybe be a partner in a practice. And that's kind of what you do with an MD. But because nobody tells you the reality, which is there's hundreds of other things you could do with your MD besides practice and see patients. And I think we're not taught to sort of have that entrepreneurial mindset. And so for me, like, I have that. And so it was easy to kind of be like, hey, I'm going to open this clinic, and then say yes to what has turned out to be an amazing partnership with our CEO, and now the rest of our co-founders and employees and staff that we have, and these great talented people that we work with. That was really easy for me to do. But I think most physicians, I would say, just aren't trained to think about medicine in that way. And so it becomes hard for them to kind of be like, yeah, I'll join a startup, or yeah, let's do this different thing. That seems awesome,
Yeah, well, I think there's no question that, and I think part of it is because of the tremendous debt that now students come out of medical training with, on the upwards of $200,000 plus, that the risk aversion is so high to do something like a startup right out of residency. I mean, there's a lot you introduce that, a lot of trepidation to go into some venture like that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's not any part of medical school where they talk about really even practicing. I mean, it's sort of an osmotic sort of you just have to get it just by seeing it or hearing about it, but you really don't have any idea, unless you happen to rotate through something, to really know that something even exists. There's no business. And like you mentioned too, there's no business in medicine. There's no, what's payroll, how benefits, HR, all that sort of thing that you have to just learn on the fly, which is, I think, kind of weird, because it's almost like they're training us all to just go right out into be employees somewhere, or like you said, join an established practice where someone's already figured that out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really a shame, because there's so many things you can do, in technology and device development and software development. And, there's so much out there for physicians that people might really be otherwise interested in, but unless you're in it, you'd have no idea that it exists. And I'd also like to say, hopefully I can say this, Eric, if there are any entrepreneurial minded pediatricians that are amazing listening, definitely contact us through our website, because we are hiring like crazy. So, and we're awesome and amazing. Can I say that?
Well, I think you just did, so that's fine.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
I'm speaking with Dr. Corey Fish, who's the CMO of Brave Care, who obviously pediatric urgent cares. And so obviously you think it's scalable. This is something you're not looking just to keep in the Portland, Oregon area.
Correct.
You're looking to move this out of state.
Yep.
All the way across country, wherever. Is it sort of it? And you don't have to certainly tell me if this is sort of proprietary, but it's a strategy. You find a place with a couple people who are interested in doing this, who can start a practice. You're just like, here we can put a foothold in whatever city this is, because we've got a couple people who are interested, who seem like good candidates.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into that, and kind of who the players are in a location. I mean, we we're not looking to be super aggressive and to be jerks about it, but I think there's several paths. There's places like maybe Grand Rapids where this kind of thing doesn't exist, or other places like that.
Right.
But there's also kind of this quote unquote acqui-hire path where it's maybe people like me who bit off a little more than they can chew, and just are kind of like, hey, I have this thing, I'm feeling really good about it, but I want to keep doing it, but I want maybe somebody to come in and just sort of run the business, do a rebrand and kind of just go from there. And then, there's people who are maybe want to do that, but don't necessarily have the resources or the know-how. And you could kind of, do things that way as well. So I think there's several avenues open to us now, which is fun and exciting.
Do you staff primarily, when it comes to physicians, do you staff people who are 100% urgent care and they're in your clinic, or do you people like sort of moonlight? And then how many docs do you need to run a clinic? Because I assume you're open not 24/7, but you're open 7 days a week, probably.
Yeah. We're open 10 to 10, 7 days a week. And I think, we've been doing okay with like one provider on, and enough support staff. I think we're kind of at the point now where we're going to need to add a second provider on, and I think some of that has to do with like, are you hiring somebody who already has a bunch of patients that know about them and maybe you'll kind of ramp quickly, or is it somebody who's relatively unknown in the community? So there are 3 of us providers now, hopefully going to have another 1 or 2 hired within the next week or two. But typically for a clinic, we sort of have kind of guesstimated at 4 to 5 providers per clinic, and then just at more as the volume dictates. But at some point the number of exam rooms becomes your limiting factor more than just providers, right? Because you can't have 10 exam rooms and just keep putting providers in to deal with overload, because eventually you're going to run out of rooms. So at some point it becomes more about that than the provider count.
Yeah, well, that's where I suppose you think, well, we just need to open on the other side of town or something, right?
Exactly.
You get so busy.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, we just need to open another space.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other one I was wondering about is, you're the CMO now. You were doing everything, like most startup people, and I don't know how much you're familiar with direct primary care, but I've interviewed a number of direct primary care physicians, and they're, for the most part, they're solo practitioners who go in and they just have a membership, based practice where you just pay $50 a month and then you get all your care through them, and they have a lot smaller patient volume, but they have to figure out the whole business, everything. And they usually can't scale up too much unless they start bringing other docs on with them. And so you obviously, it's a little different. You're a chief medical officer. I assume you're doing some clinical work. Are you planning on maintaining some clinical, your toe in the water all the time? I mean, how do you separate the business aspect and the investing part, and then also to actually, do the medicine, which is the fun part too?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the important thing to remember, and the thing I had to kind of remind myself, is nothing's set in stone, right? So I think where we are right now, I'm feeling kind of more demands on my time in order to kind of help scale and grow and make sure that we're, kind of doing more of the traditional CMO work versus patient care. But, once we're, we kind of do a big sprint, and then, that kind of opens more of my time, and maybe I go back to like, a day a week or something something like that. So I'm not ready to give it up like totally for permanent. But I'm very much to my surprise, I'm finding myself being really interested in the management side of things, and really kind of seeing myself as this evangelist for what our medical culture should be. So that's kind of what it's been really interesting to think about that, and hiring and managing people, and it's been kind of fun. And I never would have, if you would have asked me this 10 years ago, if I ever would have thought I would have been interested in that, I wouldn't have said hell no. But this is it's actually been quite a pleasant surprise.
Well, it is interesting how you, throughout your different parts of your career, you encounter new puzzles. And, I think medicine, and like you mentioned with just trying to diagnose a kid who's a 2-year-old, they can't tell you anything. They can maybe vaguely tell you their tummy hurts or something. And so you got to puzzle it out. And that's sort of what you do as the CMO. I know when I was president of my anesthesia group, it was a lot of fun. The strategic parts were very fun. The things that were not fun is if you talk to anyone who's in management, is the personnel issues, the things you deal with yes. people saying things and doing things. And that's the thing that makes you want to just wish you didn't have that position. But the other part, running the business, is actually kind of fun.
Yes, it is, and very thankful for our area practice manager, Marlon Williams, who we just hired, and Mariam Tahiri, our chief operations person, who thankfully deal with the bulk of the HR thing, so I don't have to. I mean, it doesn't work well when the physician who is working with everyone all the time does yes. the HR stuff. I've been at other places where that's not gone well, and it just doesn't work. And thankfully, I don't particularly care for it all that much. But because I don't think it works well, then I can largely just sort of stay out of it, which is kind of nice.
That is a skill that I admit I was not very good at, and yeah. I think it's really challenging to be able to, discipline's maybe the wrong word, but to actually especially if you have to maintain a working relationship with someone, to really say you're in the wrong, you've got to clean your act up or whatever, and then actually deliver that message so that they get the message, but do it fairly. And I mean, it's really challenging, as anyone who's been in management would tell you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it goes better when there's some third party that's neutral that deals with that stuff, and that's kind of how we've set it up, and it's been great, actually. Although we have such an amazing team of people that we rarely have to deal with that, which also feels really nice.
The final question I had about your practice, when you went to go, I mean, you had an established practice. You met this individual, I forgot his name.
Darius. Yeah, Darius Montseff. Yeah.
Darius, right. And so he said, hey, let's take this to a different level, or, we'll scale this up. Did he tell you how to do all the venture capital and how it's sort of all that sort of plan? Did he know how to do all that? Is that sort of what he brought to the table?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he has had a couple successful exits from startups. Most recently was with a company called Sightbox, which was a prescription contact lens, business. You pay your fee, you get your yes. contacts, you get your eye mm-hmm. exam, and that was acquired by Johnson & Johnson. And so he's just really well known, and he's a wonderful kind of big idea, vision, overall direction person. He's just got a good knack for that. And I mean, most people in startup land don't succeed ever. And for somebody to have a couple successful exits and a couple other successes, it's like you got to be doing something right. Plus, I really like the guy. We've actually gotten to be really good friends, which is super awesome. It feels great to work with somebody like that. He definitely knows how to, he's seen the movie, he knows how it ends. He's well known enough to where we can, we have had the ability to be very choosy with our investments, and we can work really well with, with people who, align very closely with our mission, and, it's just been great. And he really insulates me from all of that. So, I might meet some investors every now and again, but I really don't deal with any of that stuff, which is great. But it's a huge job. I wouldn't even know where to start. So really thankful for him, to be able to do that. And then our chief technical officer, Asa Miller, also has some experience there. And so, as does Mariam, I suppose. So those guys kind of they know what's going on. They've been around the playground for a while, and the joke is I'm sort of the company Luddite, so they can kind of they sort of are able to kind of help navigate all of the technology and all of that stuff, which is awesome.
Well, and it's nice having the ability to sort of be the vision person and the person who can manage the clinical aspects of it, and then have other people can take care, open the door. They have the ability to open those doors for the venture capital and those sorts of things, which are super important, obviously, to get something like this off the ground. And, I guess it was very serendipitous that he happened to come to your clinic twice. That's great that it worked out like that.
Yeah, and it's true. And when we succeed with all of this, I'm gonna end up buying his son Spencer probably a really nice gift, because if he hadn't have fallen off his bike and hurt his chin, who knows where we'd be.
Life is funny that way, and there's something about when opportunity knocks, you're gonna open the door. So that's it's really neat hearing stories like this. I want to also say that for the listeners, to go to bravecare.com. That's the website for Dr. Fish's practice. But it is the neatest pediatric practice, because everyone on the About page, I love how your pictures, actually, if you scroll over it, they switch to a child picture underneath. That is really clever. Whose idea was that?
That was a collaboration between Cindy, our lead designer, and Darius and Asa, I think, were the ones that came up with that idea. So Cindy was responsible for all of the lovely design on the website, and so she made the magic happen as far as all that goes. So yeah, it's definitely fun. All of our business cards actually have our kid photos. So when you mouse over that and the kid photo pops up, all of our business cards have that photo on it.
I'll have to make sure I use the right JPEG though for the show notes.
Oh yeah, I think I sent you the adult one, but you could use the kid. I know, I've got it. Yeah.
But anyway, that's the fun part about being a pediatrician, right? You can get away with doing stuff like that and have a little bit more fun, and looser with you're not quite so stiff and formal.
Yeah, that's true. It actually reminds me of just a really brief, funny story, and I feel like I can say this now. I went to the University of Washington School of Medicine. I love it. Go Huskies. Great experience. But I definitely came into medical school as like the one who is like, I'm not going to be this stiff doctor and wear a tie and you can't, tell me what to do and all this stuff. I grew a mohawk my second year. I never wore the white coat. I just was like, I was going to break your mold, man. And I definitely made life like pretty tough on myself. I think every single rotation, pediatrics was my last one. I think every single rotation that I did prior to pediatrics, there was some comment about like my lack of professionalism on my evaluation. And then I got to pediatrics and they were like, this guy's awesome. And I was like, oh, I'm not being unprofessional. I'm just acting like a pediatrician. Maybe this is what I should do.
And you found your home.
I did. I found my home, but sorry to all my advisors. Terry Mengert, sorry, I probably gave you a lot of gray hair. But yeah, it all worked out. I'm doing just fine.
Well, Dr. Fish, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there a place people can follow more about what you're up to and your group? And certainly if they are interested in starting their own pediatric urgent care, they can contact you. Yeah,
website, bravecare.com. You could follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Brave Care, we're on all three of those. But yeah, that's the best place. And I really appreciate it. This has been fun. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yep, take care.
Thanks for listening to The Paradox. If you like what the doc is doing, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher. And share the show with your friends. Become a supporting listener to get access to special bonuses at patreon.com/theparadox. Show notes can be found at theparadox.com.